Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third episode of the Roman Polcha podcast. Today I am proud, esteemed, and excited to introduce the most anticipated guest in the history of this show. Today I have on a man who deserves a proper introduction. A scholar athlete, the Greenwood High School 2027 class president, my brother, Marek Polcha. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Roman. I really appreciate being here.
I'm just so excited to have you on. You have just no idea how excited I am. I'm just blown away to have this man here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here on this podcast with you, and I think we're going to have some good conversations and have a good time together.
That's the hope, is good conversation, productive conversation. I have a lot for you from a variety of different sectors. We're going to talk about who you are, where you come from, your interests, and of course we're going to talk about some of the scholarly things that you are so talented in, careers and the future and politics, and just in general a little bit about everything that you know about. We got a lot to hit up, so let's get right into it. So, Marek, the first question that I wanted to ask you is, describe yourself using 3 key characteristics.
Let's start with one. One key characteristic that I would use to describe myself is logical. A lot of people like to say I'm a very logical thinker. I'm good at thinking. I'm really good at math. So whenever I see stuff, I think of it in a logical and a smart kind of way, which really helps me through stuff. Another characteristic I would use to describe myself is hardworking. And, that'll really come up whenever we talk about wrestling and school, because really to achieve the success that I have, I really have to work hard and I really have to push my body and my mind to the limit. And a third characteristic I would use to describe myself is a leader, and that comes about with me being the class president. I really take a leadership role in a lot of things that I do, whether it's a class presentation or a fundraiser or whatever. I'm going to take initiative, and I'm going to be the guy that you can rely on, the guy that can have the potential to carry the group or whatever we're doing.
That's phenomenal. So, just so I can clarify, the 3 characteristics that make Marek Polcha the scholar athlete, the 2027 Greenwood class president, the stud wrestler, those characteristics are logical thinker,
Yep.
hard work,
Yes.
and great leader.
Yep.
Okay. So, just so my audience here can get a slightly better understanding of some of the things that you've participated in. I'm your brother, so I know just about everything that you've done in your life, and I know what kind of special person you are. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experiences, and with those experiences, I wanted to ask you about some of the things that you have either volunteered with and also outside of volunteering worked with. So I wanted to ask you, how have you applied those skills to your volunteer work as an assistant mason, which for those of you in the audience obviously will know, Marek did some volunteer work for a masonry gentleman, and did some great work with him. And also, this is not a volunteer, but just a community service work, I would say, as a lifeguard at the town pool. So I'd like to ask you, how did those traits kind of help you in those roles as an assistant mason volunteer and at the town pool as a lifeguard, and what lessons did you kind of learn from those aspects of your life?
So the first thing I would like to say is the one that really resonates with the assisting of the masonry would obviously be hardworking. So I have a story that goes along with that. So my brother and me were wrestling at the NHSCA National High School Duels Tournament, and my brother got injured. This is like, say, a few days before the end of
And
school.
just so the audience can clarify,
Yeah.
you only have one brother, so this brother is
the host of the show.
okay.
And it's the last day of school. I go home. I'm getting ready to go to bed, getting ready to relax, and I get a text from my mom saying, "Guess what? You're getting up at 6 or 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, and you're gonna help Jim Albert, who is the Mason." So I get up the next day, and I go to this huge job site at Barner's Church in Liverpool, Pennsylvania. And, all day that day, grueling 8 hours of lifting 50, 60-pound cinder blocks around. So, really, through those experiences working with him, I think I worked with him for about a month and a half that summer. It was really great experience because I really had to push my body to its limit. And those days were long, grueling, tiring. I was on my feet all day. Those were just some really tough long days. And with the lifeguarding, so the lifeguarding, I would say leadership would be the one that resonates with that a lot, because being a lifeguard, you have to control a lot of the things around you, because whenever you're sitting on that chair by yourself, it's just you and the people in the pool. So you really have to be attentive. You have to be ready to blow your whistle, take command. You have to be ready to tell everybody what's going on. You need to be ready to be that person that can save lives, can be the person to enforce the rules. And so, yeah, I would say leadership really with the lifeguarding job and with the masonry job is where the hardworking part of me comes into play.
Great answer. So another question I wanted to ask you, I know you had mentioned Barner's Church and the location being Liverpool, Pennsylvania. So I wanted to ask you, obviously the audience knows my feelings as a rural Pennsylvania native, as a Eagles, Flyers, Sixers, Phillies fan. So I wanted to ask you, what is, obviously you're also fans of these teams growing up in the same area that I grew up in. We lived together our whole lives, never lived apart, shared a room our whole lives together. Just quickly, it doesn't have to be a long, elaborate answer. What is your feelings on the state of Philadelphia sports right now and the state that we're in?
So that's a very tough question, because honestly, being a Philly sports fan is really like a roller coaster. So, one week our state might be really high. We're up in the clouds, The Eagles just pulled off a huge win. The Flyers had a nice game, so on and so forth. But if I were to choose one state for right now, it wouldn't be terrible, but it wouldn't be great either. Just because the Phillies had a really disappointing season. That end was so sad for all of us. We had such high hopes for them, and then that kind of came crashing down. You have all the drama going on with the Sixers and Joel Embiid. Everyone loves Joel Embiid, but, there's a time and a place whenever you realize, like, your superstar needs to become a leader. So there's some issues there. The Flyers have been not as good as expected. They haven't been like bottom of the barrel, but they have not been great. And I guess so. The Eagles are really the only team that I'm like really excited for right now. And earlier in the year, they had issues with like Soriani and the coaching and stuff. But right now, the Eagles are positive. So that's how I would look at it.
So you think that based on what are your expectations for the Eagles then to say that they're positive? Because I'm curious as to that, because the state that the Eagles are at right now, do you think that they're contending for a Super Bowl? Because I feel like coming into the year, that was the expectation, is that it's for the Eagles to have a successful season, we have to be contending to make a Super Bowl like we did 2 years ago. And at least personally, right now, I don't think that we're on nearly the same level as the Lions. Um, I don't know if I would feel comfortable with us playing the Buccaneers after the way we played them a few weeks ago. So do you think that we're contending for a Super Bowl, or do you just have mitigated expectations compared to myself?
Yeah, so I never had the expectation of the Eagles going to the Super Bowl this year, especially because of the sour taste of how last year ended. I honestly just, uh, I think it'd be a successful season if we made it to the playoffs and won a game. So that's how I feel dealing with the Eagles. They're a tough team to deal with because it's such a talented team, but I think the coaching is a major issue, and that's gonna hinder us throughout the season and coming into the playoffs.
So another question I kind of wanted to ask you is growing up in rural Pennsylvania, do you like Pennsylvania as a state living here? And do you think you like it enough that you'd want to stick around in rural Pennsylvania as an adult?
Yeah, so uh, as a whole, I think Pennsylvania is a pretty good state. The place I live in right now, I really like. I live in a small town, population maybe about 1,000. I really love the small town vibe. Everyone's super nice, super friendly. So I can't really see myself moving far away from my family and from the town and everyone that I know here.
So for those in the audience that don't quite understand what America's talking about here, we live in a county of Pennsylvania called Perry County, and within Perry County, there was only 4 public school districts within Perry County. Those being Greenwood High School, where we attend, Susquehanna High School, West Perry High School, and Newport High School. The largest of those high schools is West Perry High School, which I'm going to say has less than 200 as a graduating class number. The smallest of those high schools is Greenwood High School, where we attend, where the graduating class rate is approximately 55 to 60. And then the Susquehanna to Newport is 80 to 110. So the area of Pennsylvania that we come from is such a small area. So that kind of ties into the next question I want to ask you, which is what makes living in Perry County unique? And can you just describe for the audience a little bit what living in Perry County is like?
Um, yeah, so something that makes living in Perry County unique is just the small town vibes that you get from each place. So one of the things that I think defines Perry County is our local businesses. I think our local businesses are amazing. They're good. They keep everything running well. And the second part of your question was, what was it?
Can you just describe living in Perry
Yeah,
County?
okay. So living in Perry County is pretty good just because everything is super close. I think the edge of the county is probably like 45, 50 minutes away. So everything in the county is very easily accessible. Another thing is, uh, it's nice to know everybody, and living in Perry County, it feels like we know all the people from the other schools. Even though we're rivals, we can still be friends. So I feel like being able to know everybody, which is because of the size, obviously, of our county, I think that's a really good thing about living in Perry County.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love living in Perry County. It's a place that I'd like to stick around. So, how has this environment where you grow up, you've grown up in a place that you described as, and I described myself as, very small. You know everybody. You are friends with everybody. There's local businesses everywhere. Everyone treats each other with kindness. You're 45 minutes away from the edge of the county, which for some people is unthinkable. There's people in New York, I'm sure, that maybe, I don't know if they are watching this show right now, but that literally can't even get from one end of town to the other in 45 minutes. And the question I want to ask you is, how has where you've grown up affected your values?
So where I've grown up has definitely affected my values. It really makes you value the little things and knowing that big things come in small packages. Because while we may be overlooked by big towns, big cities, really we're learned to value each other in the small town vibe, which is, everyone's kind to everybody, everyone knows everybody, everyone's gonna be there for that person just because, you know, everyone's there to know everybody, everyone lives so close to each other. It really builds a vibe of bonding and friendship amongst the community and the people living in it.
So the last question that I want to ask you, and I don't want this to turn too much into a straight interview so much as a conversation, but some of these questions I feel like I've asked you kind of rapid fire, but these are important questions just so the audience can get a good feel of where you are, who you are and where you come from. So the last question I wanted to ask you is a little bit of a more of a lighthearted question on the topic of where you come from, and that is, where is one place in the world that you would like to visit someday?
So that's a really good question. Does it have to be in the should
No, anywhere in the world.
anywhere in the entire
It
world?
could just be a vacation. Anywhere in the world you would like to. What is the number one place in the world that I should say that you would like to visit someday?
Okay, so there's two places that like I'm 50-50 on.
Okay.
First place is Greece. I would love to see Greece, just cause like I'm very interested in the history of Greece. It's really interesting to me. And the second place would be Rome, Italy. I would love to see like the Colosseum and everything in it. And as I was saying that, I just thought of one more, and this one actually might be the number one. I would love to see the Great Pyramids. Anything in Egypt to me is fascinating. So whether that be the Valley of the Kings, or the Sphinx, or the pyramids, all that stuff is very interesting and it entices me a lot.
Visiting the Great Pyramids would be awesome, but I would have to say, if someone asked me that question right back,
Yeah.
the number one place in the world that I would like to visit would be Rome, and that was one of the places you mentioned.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the culture there and the history, like you had mentioned. Obviously, I'm a bit of a history buff, and the history of Rome is fascinating. And seeing the Colosseum would be one of the top places in the world I would like to see. And also, with my unhealthy relationship with pasta, I would absolutely love to eat the authentic Italian food. That's my favorite world cuisine. So that would be my number one place in the world I'd like to visit. If we ever went there together someday, we'd have to learn a little bit of Italian because I know absolutely zero Italian.
Yeah, me neither. Top language, I guess.
Okay, so I want to transition now. We kind of got to talk about you a little bit. Now I want to talk about one of the things that you're most known for in our area, and that is your wrestling. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, what do you love about the sport, and what lessons has it taught you?
So we can attack the what do I love about the sport first. Something that I've really come to think about the older I've gotten is just how amazing of a sport wrestling is. Think about, I think about all the other sports that my friends are doing, and there's one key difference with all of them in wrestling, and that is that wrestling's the original sport. It was created thousands and thousands of years ago. So sometimes I just sit back and think that I'm carrying out this ancient sport that the Greeks used to do at the Olympics 2,000 years ago, and just how amazing it is that that sport was created that long ago, and I'm still competing in it today.
So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Just to think about how old of a sport it is compared to some of these other sports. Like most of these other sports people are doing are 100, 200 years old. And to think that ours was around thousands, plural, years ago is interesting. And another question I'd like to ask you um, about that is, so what lesson has it taught you? I know for me personally, I think the number one lesson that wrestling has taught me would probably be the lesson of discipline. Because in wrestling, discipline is everything. Practice requires discipline. You're doing the same rep 10,000 times. You're shooting the same double leg, the same single leg, the same high crotch. You practice the same things over and over and over again. And as you know, that can be taxing on your mind. And with the diet and with the weight cutting that occurs in wrestling, everything you do requires discipline.
Mm-hmm.
If a wrestler has no discipline, then in the third period of a close match, they're going to get out of position. And in that position, if the other wrestler is trained more in the aspect of discipline, they will take advantage of that. You cannot lose focus in wrestling for 1 second, which I feel like, besides maybe a mixed martial arts, is not like that in other sports. So, just curious to hear what lesson you think you've
So one of the lessons that really shaped me a lot and really is important to me, I always think about this whenever I'm asked questions like this, um, is the simple lesson: you win some and you lose some. Because whenever I was a little kid, anytime I lost a match, I would bawl and I would bawl and I would be so upset. I would cry all the time. And really, the older I get, the more I realize that while losses, they're not great, losses have one good thing about them, and that is you're always going to learn. Losing is important in any factor of life, whether it's wrestling, school, friendships, whatever. You're always going to lose at some point, and losing isn't always a bad thing, because what you can do is you can take that loss, you can take the lessons, and you can build on it so that the next time it happens, it's not as bad. So I feel like that's really taught me a lot within my life, that lesson from wrestling.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I feel like is important in life to learn. And a lot of kids these days, I feel like, are not completely attached to that lesson. So I think that's important. So, do you think that understanding is the most important quality of a good wrestler? Just speaking from like a, well, I'm not talking, obviously, I'm not talking to you because you're David Taylor or
Obviously.
Dan Gable, who's the top of the top. But to you, what are the qualities that makes up a good wrestler? And a good wrestler, you know, we're talking a good high school wrestler, a good junior high wrestler, a good even young youth wrestler. What is
Yeah.
the quality that makes
So
that?
I think work ethic is super important. You get what you put into the sport. I feel like working hard in the room, outside the room, is the most important thing, because it is a really tough sport, and a lot of kids will just screw around at practice, and those are the kids that you're gonna see getting pinned on the mat. So you really have to work hard to perfect your craft. You really have to train hard. You have to work a lot to be good at wrestling. It's not an easy sport. It's really tough, not just on your physical body, but on your mind. And then not just that, you add in the elements of weight cutting, weight management, school, all this stuff together. It's not easy. And you have to be really tough physically and mentally to be a really good wrestler.
Now, obviously, you're not a coach. We know that coming in. But I would just be curious to ask you, in your opinion, and I have an opinion on this as well. So we'll have to kind of go back and forth on this a little bit. What makes a successful high school wrestling team? What makes a successful high school wrestling team from the perspective of a smaller public school? We're not some large private school. We don't have the ability to get kids from outside of our boundaries. We have very small boundaries in Perry County.
Hmm.
So, what is the qualities? What is the juice that you can use as a coach to create a successful high school wrestling team?
Um, I think one thing that's really important is just having good fundamentals. I feel like your team should have a certain style. Like you face off against this team, you're gonna know that this is coming. That kind of thing. So I feel like having an identity as a team is something that is really important to be successful.
What is I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. And knowing a team like West Perry, a team that we face every year, a team that this question gets brought up. I remember whenever me and you used to go to a camp with Brian Morrow every summer, and every year he'd be like, "Raise your hand if you're not from West Perry," because most of the kids that would go to these camps were from West Perry.
Yeah.
Great school, hardworking wrestlers at that school, and he would say, "Raise your hand if you're not from West Perry," and then he would say, "What is West Perry known for?" And everyone that had their hand up that was not from West Perry would say top.
Yep.
Because West Perry, all the way up from elementary, junior high, high school, were absolute animals on top. So the question that I would follow up with that is Newport High School. We wrestle. We obviously go to Greenwood. We co-op with Newport due to our such small numbers. As we said, Newport is the second of four um, schools in Perry County. What is the identity of the Newport wrestling culture?
Yeah. So obviously, one thing that I like to think about right away about our team is like, we would always be like, oh crap, we're wrestling West Perry. Like, we know they're going to be tough. I feel like most schools know that we have a successful program and that we're going to be tough every year. And I feel like our identity as Newport wrestling as a whole is, we just have like a really tough and gritty style. So we're just a tough team to beat. We're gonna have lots of close matches. So we're just like a really tough kind of grindy team.
So do you think that is whenever you talk about tough and grindy, do you just mean do you think our identity is like just toughness and conditioning and just always being able to keep going until the end? Or is there any specific techniques that are associated with that tough, gritty style? Like, is there a specific takedown that you feel like we're known for due to our tough, gritty style? Or are you talking more just from a mental toughness, conditioning, aggressive style?
Yeah, so I think from more the mental side of things, last year, our identity as a team was more of like we just got a lot of pins, which was interesting way of looking at it. And our main moves that we were doing were just like simple moves. Fundamentals really was huge for our team last year. Halves, cradles, Turks, and we would just get. We would usually per duel get like 4 or 5 duels, which
Pins.
pins,
Yes.
which is what made our team really successful.
And I was going to say, to add on to that, the ironic part is I agree. We were a big pinning team last year. We were a big team. And pretty much mainly our main pinning combination as a team was the half. And it's kind of ironic due to the fact that we didn't really get that many pins at the beginning of the year. And then midway through the year, our coach had us starting doing halves every single practice. And our guys started catching halves at a variety of different positions, which is something interesting about wrestling is that moves can be hit from so many different positions, so experience is also key in wrestling because it's understanding all these different positions. After you've seen a position 10,000 times, things just start to happen. You start to hit moves without thinking. And I feel like our team started to do that with the half Nelson, which is obviously a very fundamental move. So it's easier and quicker for guys to start feeling the positions with the half of knowing exactly when to hit it. So I feel like that was interesting. And on your comment about the fundamentals, I couldn't disagree more. And I feel like emphasizing the fundamentals as a coach is something that
Couldn't disagree more.
I couldn't agree more.
Oh, okay. It sounded like you said disagree.
Sorry, I couldn't agree more. Just to clarify, I couldn't agree more. Fundamentals in wrestling, especially in high school, are so important because you see teams out there, and it happens kid to kid. But usually, whenever the coach establishes a culture of discipline, like I said earlier, fundamentals to me is discipline. It's staying in your stance. It's keeping your elbows in. It's keeping your knees bent. It's keeping pressure on top all the time, not letting up pressure on top, keeping on moving on bottom. These are fundamentals. You don't really need to, I would say, practice a specific move. It is really just on bottom, you don't stop moving. At neutral, your elbows are in. Your head's in the best position it can be in. You're never out of your stance. You're never out of your stance. And those fundamentals, I feel like, is if your team has solid fundamentals, good conditioning, strong discipline, which I think the discipline really just goes back to all of it. The discipline is the fundamentals. The discipline is the conditioning. Then I feel like you'll have a successful team. So that is kind of the last question that I wanted to ask you about wrestling. So with that, we have completed part 1 of the 4 parts to this interview and this podcast. So I am going to thank you for completing part 1 with me. And I'm excited to resume here in a couple minutes with part 2. We're just going to take a quick bathroom break and we'll resume. These parts will come out in 4 different parts on YouTube. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. This is the conclusion of Part 1. Stick around for Part 2 to hear Marek's opinions and thoughts on class presidency and really his academics as a whole, science, math, and history. Thank you, Marek, for completing Part 1 with me.
Yeah, of course.